The moment my sister laughed and told her husband's colleagues, "Oh, that's not my sister, she's just my assistant for the weekend," I felt something inside me go very, very still. Not hurt, not angry, just still, like the 3 seconds before an earthquake when even the birds stop. I had flown in from Boston on a red-eye. I had a keynote to deliver in 14 hours. I had a patient with a mitral valve defect whose imaging I'd reviewed at 30,000 feet, annotating on my phone while the cabin lights were dimmed and everyone else slept. And I was standing in the lobby of the Harrington Grand in downtown Chicago, still in my travel clothes, holding a coffee I hadn't had a chance to drink, while my sister made her little joke to a circle of people I'd never met. They laughed politely, the way people do. My sister, I'll call her by the name she's always used to remind me of my place. My sister just kept smiling and moved the conversation along, and I stood there thinking, 38 years, that's how long I've let this go. I'm going to tell you something that doesn't make easy sense. I'm a cardiac surgeon. I've been the department chief at one of the top academic medical centers in the country for the last 4 years. Before that, I spent 6 years as an attending at Mass General after completing a fellowship in structural heart disease at Cleveland Clinic. I have published in the New England Journal of Medicine twice. The second time, they put my name on the cover summary. And for the better part of my adult life, I sent my family money every month and let them tell their neighbors I worked in medicine somewhere, and let my sister borrow my credit card for her kitchen renovation, and did not correct a single person who called me the quiet one. I know how that sounds. I am aware of exactly how that sounds. But here is what I've learned, late and at great cost. Surgical precision and emotional self-preservation are two entirely different skill sets. One, I mastered. The other, I spent 4 decades outsourcing to people who had every reason to keep me small. I grew up in Beaumont, Texas, the second of 2 daughters. My sister is 4 years older than me, which when you're children means she got to define the terms of everything. She was louder. She was prettier in the way that adults noticed and commented on. She got my mother's eyes and my father's confidence, and I got my grandmother's brain, which nobody counted until much later. My father was a plant manager at an ExxonMobil facility. Good, steady work. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling. My mother stayed home until my sister and I were both in school, then worked part-time at the school district office. Normal life. Southeast Texas normal. What was not normal, or what I didn't understand was not normal until I was well into my 20s, was the way my family talked about intelligence. My sister got B's and C's, and everyone said she was well-rounded, social, good with people. I got straight A's and won the regional science fair at 13, and my mother used to say, a little too carefully, Claire is the studious one. The way you'd say Claire is the left-handed one. A minor deviation, a footnote. By the time I was in high school, the pattern was calcified. My sister was the one who had friends over, the one whose milestones got celebrated, the one my parents talked about at church. I was in the library, doing extra credit, invisible in the way that very quiet, very focused kids can be invisible, even when they're achieving things nobody in the family quite has the vocabulary to describe. I applied to Rice University on my own. I filled out the financial aid forms myself, because my parents didn't understand the FAFSA, and my sister's college application experience had involved my mother making phone calls to the state school 40 minutes away. When my acceptance letter came, full scholarship, merit-based, I put it on the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning. My mother looked at it and said, "Houston, that's far." That was the whole response. My father said, "You sure you don't want to go somewhere closer? It's a big city." He meant it kindly. He genuinely did. He just didn't have a frame for what Rice meant, or what I'd done to get there, or why it mattered. My sister said, "Good for you," in exactly the tone you'd use if someone told you they'd found a great parking spot. I drove myself to orientation. I told myself it didn't sting. Medical school was Johns Hopkins. That fact still sounds strange to me when I say it out loud, not from false modesty, but because I remember being 21 and sitting in the MCAT prep center in Houston and thinking that I was probably aiming too high, that I'd been raised in a house where nobody had ever aimed that high, and maybe that meant something about what was possible for me. I got a 522. I won't pretend that didn't matter. It mattered enormously. I called my mother from the parking lot. She said, "That's good, honey. Your sister just listed her house, did I tell you? She and Kevin are upgrading." My sister had married Kevin, I'll call him my brother-in-law because that's what he was, when she was 24. He sold commercial real estate. He had a loud laugh and strong opinions about golf and had never once, in the entire time I knew him, asked me a single question about my work. Not one, in 15 years. I've thought about that a lot. At Hopkins, I found, for the first time in my life, a room full of people who talked about ideas the way my family talked about weekend and plans. I had a roommate named Sophie who stayed up until 3 in the morning debating the ethics of clinical trial design. I had professors who learned my name by the second week. I had a research advisor who told me, in my second year, that I had a particular intuition for structural anomalies that he didn't see very often. I called my mother after that conversation. I tried to explain what he'd said. She said, "That's wonderful. Can you bring anything for Thanksgiving? Your sister is making the turkey again." I brought the pie. I always brought the pie. The money started during my residency. Surgical residency is not well compensated relative to the hours and the debt load and the psychological erosion. But I was in Boston, I was careful, and I had no social life to spend money on, so I saved more than most of my co-residents. When my father's back surgery left him out of work for 3 months, I sent money home without being asked. $1,200. It felt like the right thing to do. That was the first time. The second time, my sister's furnace died in February. She called and didn't quite ask, just described the situation in a particular way. "We're just really stretched right now with the mortgage refinance." And I sent $2,000. The third time was my brother-in-law's car. The fourth time was my niece's braces. The fifth time I stopped counting. By the time I finished my fellowship and took the attending position at Mass General, I had established what I can only describe as a shadow financial support system for my family. Monthly transfers to my parents, $800, then $1,200, then $1,500 as my salary climbed. Occasional larger amounts for my sister. Never discussed, never acknowledged, almost never thanked, except by my father, who would sometimes say, "You've always been good to us, Claire," in a way that was genuine and broke my heart a little every time, because he meant it as a compliment and I heard it as a life sentence. My sister never said thank you. Not once in all those years. She operated on the assumption that this was simply the arrangement, that I had money because I worked all the time and didn't have a family to spend it on, that my professional achievements were a kind of personality trait rather than the result of 20 years of structured sacrifice, and that the money I sent was therefore not a gift but a correction, a redistribution of my surplus. I told myself I was doing it out of love, and I was partly. But I was also doing it because I'd been trained since childhood to buy my way into relevance with people who were never going to grant me relevance any other way. I didn't understand that for a very long time. I became the chief of cardiac surgery at Whitmore University Medical Center in Boston 4 years ago. The appointment was, I don't have a word for it that doesn't sound like bragging. It was the kind of thing that gets announced in the hospital newsletter and earns you a lunch with the dean and a framed certificate that you hang in your office and look at sometimes when the month has been hard. My mother's response when I called to tell her, "Does that mean you'll have to work even more?" My sister texted, "Congrats! Kevin says that's a big deal, Angie." I printed the newsletter announcement and put it in a drawer. What I didn't tell my family, because they'd never asked, and because I'd long since stopped expecting them to ask, was what the appointment actually meant in my field. It meant I would help set the surgical training standards for the next generation of cardiac surgeons. It meant I would chair the committee that reviewed our outcomes data and submitted it to the National Registry. It meant I would be the person speaking at conferences, the person other department chiefs called when they had a complex case, the person whose name showed up in the sort of medical context that would mean nothing to my family and everything to me. I gave a keynote at the American Heart Association annual conference 18 months into my tenure, 1,400 physicians in a room in Atlanta. I had prepared for 3 months. I had rehearsed in my hotel bathroom at midnight. When I walked to that podium and looked out at that room, I felt, for about 45 seconds, exactly like the person I had spent my life trying to become. Then I went back to my hotel room and called my mother, who told me that my sister was having trouble with her middle daughter's school situation, and did I think I could come home for a few weeks that summer. I said I'd try. The Chicago conference was the Society of Thoracic Surgeons' annual meeting. It's one of the more significant gatherings in my field. The people in that ballroom were program directors, department chiefs, the surgeon who wrote the textbook I used in my fellowship. When I was invited to deliver the Harrington Lecture, which is the named lecture, the one that goes in your permanent bio, I had called my research advisor from Hopkins, the one who'd first told me I had good instincts, and I had said, "I need you to know that none of this would have happened without you." He said, "Don't be ridiculous." I just pointed at what was already there. I didn't tell my family I was giving the lecture. I told them I was going to a conference in Chicago. My sister asked if I could bring back some of that Chicago popcorn from the airport, the kind in the tin. She was at the conference because her husband had a client dinner in the city, and she'd tagged along to shop on the Magnificent Mile, and she'd texted me the morning I arrived. "Are you already in Chicago? Kevin and I should come to your hotel for drinks. It'll be fun." And I had said yes, because I always said yes, because that's what you do when you've spent a lifetime contracting yourself to fit into the spaces your family leaves for you. They met me in the lobby. Kevin in a blazer, my sister in something expensive. She'd had her hair done. She looked good. She always looked good. She was talking to 2 men who turned out to be clients of Kevin's. Commercial real estate, some development project on the north side, and when I walked up, roller bags still behind me, conference badge still in my bag. She glanced at me and made her introduction without breaking the flow of conversation. This is Claire. She's basically my assistant for the weekend. She's going to help me navigate the conference I'm crashing. She laughed. They laughed. Kevin laughed. I looked at her. She wasn't being cruel, exactly. That was never my sister's mode. She was being careless in the way people are careless when they've spent 40 years understanding you as a supporting character in their story. I wasn't Dr. Claire Sutton, Chief of Cardiac Surgery, Harrington lecturer. I was her little sister who worked in medicine somewhere, and who was useful and quiet, and could help her figure out the conference shuttle schedule. I said, "Nice to meet you," to the clients. I picked up my bag. I went to check in. I did not say a word to my sister that night. The Harrington lecture was the second morning of the conference, 9 o'clock, main ballroom. I'd been up since 4:30. Not from nerves. I'd long since made a kind of peace with public speaking, but because I had received a message the night before from a colleague at Mayo, whose patient had developed a rare complication after a procedure I'd consulted on remotely, and I'd spent 2 hours on the phone walking their team through the revised approach. That's the job. That's always been the job. You don't get to stop being a doctor because you have a lecture in the morning. My sister texted at 8:15, "Hey, can you grab me a coffee? I'll meet you outside the ballroom." I turned my phone face down. The conference center was already full. The registration desk outside the main ballroom had a banner, Société of Thoracic Surgeons Annual Meeting, and below it, the day's programming schedule, and there in the 9 o'clock slot, in large print, Harrington Lecture, Outcomes in Complex Structural Repair, a Decade of Institutional Learning, Dr. Claire Sutton, Chief of Cardiac Surgery, Whitmore University Medical Center. I know she saw it. I know because she was standing 12 feet away when I walked past with my conference folder, heading toward the speaker's registration table, and I saw her read the banner and look at me and read it again. I didn't stop. The woman at the speaker's table had my badge ready. It was a different badge from the general attendee badge, white lanyard instead of blue, with speaker printed across the top and my name and title in full below. Dr. Claire Sutton, Chief of Cardiac Surgery, Harrington Lecturer. She handed it to me and said, "Dr. Sutton, we have a reserved seat for you in the front row until it's time to go to the podium. Can I get you anything?" My sister was still standing near the registration desk. I didn't look at her. I said, "Just water, thank you." "Of course." The program chair wanted me to tell you, "We have a larger room than last year, and we're at about 93% capacity for your session." I thanked her and walked into the ballroom. I've stood at a lot of podiums. I want to be honest about that. It gets easier, and it also never entirely loses the quality of unreality. The microphone, the lights angled so that you can see the first few rows, but everything behind them is a warm dark, the way your own voice comes back to you slightly delayed through the speaker system. I spoke for 45 minutes. I had 112 slides, 3 videos of operative footage, a data set that represented 8 years of our department's outcomes, and a central argument about why current scoring systems underestimate risk in patients with prior sternotomies, which sounds narrow, but if you've been in this field for any length of time, you know it isn't. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when people are genuinely engaged, not just politely attending. I could feel it. When I finished, the program chair, a surgeon from UCSF, who had published the definitive paper on tricuspid repair that I had cited in my fellowship application, stood up and started clapping, and the room followed, and I stood at that podium for a moment longer than I needed to because I wanted to hold on to it. Not the applause, the proof, after everything. After 38 years of being the quiet one who worked in medicine somewhere, and could be passed off as somebody's weekend assistant, there was this room, and these people, and this work, and it was real, and it was mine, and nobody in my family had given it to me, and nobody in my family could take it away. I thought about my father. I thought about the Tuesday morning when I put my rice acceptance letter on the kitchen table. I thought about how much I wished he'd been there. He died 6 years ago, heart disease, which I'm aware of the irony of. He would have understood the irony too. He had a dark sense of humor, one of the few things we shared. I miss him more than I know how to say, and I missed him particularly in that ballroom. But I also knew, standing there while people I'd read and cited and admired were on their feet, that he would have been proud. He didn't have the language for what I'd done, but he had the heart for it. He always did. I found my sister in the hallway outside during the coffee break. She was holding a pastry she'd taken from the refreshment table and looking at her phone, and when she saw me coming, she looked up with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Or maybe I had, once, when we were very small, something uncertain, something almost young. She said, "That was you." I said, "Yes, the lecture." She gestured vaguely at the ballroom doors. The Harrington Lecture. Yes, she was quiet for a moment. There were people moving around us, surgeons with coffee cups and conference bags, a group of fellows taking a photo in front of the schedule board. She said, "I didn't know." I looked at her. I said, "I know you didn't." She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And that was the question, wasn't it? That was the question I had been turning over for 38 years. In one form or another. Why didn't you tell them? Why didn't you make them see? Why did you keep showing up and keeping quiet and sending money and being the assistant? I said, I've been telling you my whole life. You just weren't listening. She didn't have an answer for that. I hadn't expected one. I said, I have a session at 11 and a committee lunch, and then I'm going back to Boston. I'm sorry I can't make dinner. She said, Claire, I love you, I said. Because I did, I still do, that's the part that doesn't go away. But I need you to understand something. I'm not the quiet one. I haven't been for a very long time. And I need you to start acting like you know that. I didn't wait for her response. I went back inside. The months after Chicago were not dramatic in the way you might expect. My sister didn't call me crying. We didn't have a confrontation. My mother didn't have a sudden awakening. What happened was smaller and slower, and in the end, more real. My sister called me 2 weeks after the conference. She asked about my work for the first time in our adult lives, genuinely asked a real question with follow-ups. It was awkward. The way things are when you're learning a language you should have started years ago. But she tried. I noticed. I reduced the monthly transfers to my family significantly. Not out of anger, but because I finally understood that money had been my substitute for belonging, and I was done making that substitution. My mother adjusted to the reduction without the catastrophe I'd spent years dreading. People generally do. I stopped apologizing for my schedule. I stopped bringing the pie. I started telling people when they asked what I did, without the hedge, without the qualifier, without the small step backward I'd trained myself to take. I'm a cardiac surgeon, I'm the department chief, I do structural heart work. Just that. The truth unmodified. There's a photograph from the Chicago conference. Someone from the Society's communications team took it. Me at the podium, mid-sentence, and the audience visible behind me, all those faces. They sent it to me for the annual report. I have a copy on my desk now, in a frame, next to the photo of my father. Some mornings I look at it and feel an uncomplicated pride that I spent most of my life believing I wasn't allowed to feel. Those are good mornings. My sister sent me a text last spring, a long one, for her. She wrote about watching our mother age, about getting older herself, about the way she'd been thinking about our childhood and some of the things she'd said and done that she wasn't proud of. She wrote, I think I always made you feel like what you did didn't matter as much as the rest of us, just living our lives. And I'm really sorry for that, because what you do matters a lot. I looked you up, I read the stuff you've published. I didn't understand most of it, but I understood that you're kind of remarkable and I should have been saying that my whole life. I read it 3 times. Then I called her. We talked for an hour and a half, longer than we'd talked combined in the previous 5 years. It wasn't a reset, there's no such thing. But it was a beginning, and a beginning is not nothing. I'm 43 years old. I operate on human hearts for a living. I have been the person in the room who no one expected and who everyone underestimated, and I have learned, slowly, at a price I would not recommend paying, that the only person whose estimation ever truly mattered was my own. I just wish it hadn't taken me so long to figure that out. But I'm figuring it out now, and now is what I have, and I'm going to use it.